So first and foremost, I want to thank everyone here today for being part of this. I want to thank each of you for putting your little spice into it and helping us really educate the board members and managers that are within our industry. What I'd like to do is start off with giving some introductions. I wanted to first start off by introducing Yvonne. Yvonne is a shareholder at Siegfried. She's been practicing law since 2003, has been with the firm since 2012. Her focus is primarily on community associations, both condos, homeowners associations. And if I'm correct, you service, Yvonne, what areas within our market?
So we do, well, I am located in Broward County, but we represent condominium associations in Broward, Palm Beach, and Miami-Dade, of course.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us today, Yvonne.
Next up,
thank you. Next up, I have Daniel Odess. Daniel Odess is the founder and president of Global Pro. Daniel has recovered over $1 billion worth of claims for their clients. He also recently launched a Recovery Report Live podcast. So I wanted to thank you, Daniel, for being here with us.
Thank you for having us. I look forward to our conversation and learning from several leaders and top industry experts. This is great. So thank you for including us in this broadcast.
No problem. Thank you, Daniel. And last but not least, we have Misha. Misha is the founder and president of M2E, which is an engineering firm. Misha does hold a professional engineering license. He has over 30 years of experience in engineering and construction. During his time, Misha also was part of overseeing luxury condos that were in over 3 continents. So Misha, I wanted to thank you for being here today.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on this very worthy panel. It is a pleasure to joining you, and hopefully some of the experience that we have will benefit the people on this webinar. Thank you again.
No problem. Thank you. And myself, my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Affinity Management Services. We are an association management company that services the Tri-County area, Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach area. So why don't we just get started? I mean, I know our approach here is going to be to address several topics, with topics of obviously hurricane that we just walked into this week, or we can actually say maybe last week. Also dealing a little bit with regards to the pandemic. So why don't we start off with the pandemic, Yvonne? I know that we have 3 emergency door orders, at least that we're dealing with. Actually, I should say 4 because we have the state. Could you give our listeners a little bit of an update of what's going on maybe on the Tri-County area with regards to the emergency orders?
Sure. So what we're seeing now is that the placement of the emergency orders are now being restricted. So we're having emergency orders that are being put in place by local jurisdictions, which are lifting restrictions that they had put in place in the March, early April timeframe. We are getting the notices from Miami-Dade County, Broward County as well. Palm Beach has been about a week ahead of us. That you can open, as a condominium association, you can open your pool areas. They've been loosening restrictions as to your pool decks. In Broward County, the restrictions have been lifted so you can open your fitness rooms if you're a condominium association or a homeowners association. So the real kind of focus now is the cautious lifting of the restrictions that have put in place. And for associations, the important part, or what you want to look at this moment, is making sure that your rules and regulations meet or fit into the guidances that are given by your local jurisdictions. So if you're located in the city of Miami, you want to look at Miami-Dade County as a resource for what you can do within your community, and also the city of Miami. So that's important to make sure that you're looking at both of those places.
Correct. Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up, because a lot of times we have found that they're either looking at just the county order and not looking at their particular city. So for instance, Aventura has its way of the way that they're requiring in certain openings. City of Miami's having their ways of what requirements they're having, or even certain restrictions. So I think that's an excellent point for our listeners. With regards to emergency powers, Yvonne, could you tell me a little bit about what's still in effect with regards to emergency powers that the board of directors have?
Sure. So the Florida statutes provide emergency powers to an association. Those emergency powers are contingent, or it's read to be contingent upon having damage, quote unquote, as it's stated in the statutes. There has been a lot of discussion before we even started with having some of these emergency orders come down from the state and from the governor as to whether or not the association's emergency powers would, pursuant to the statute, would apply to associations. What ended up happening was the Department of Business and Professional Regulations entered an order, which essentially at the time said they're going to suspend the wording or the need for having damage in order for an association to have emergency powers. And we sat underneath that emergency order from the Department of Business and Professional Regulations until June 1st. As of June 1st, the department's order indicates that they do not, or they're not basically alleviating the damage requirement, although they don't say it in that manner. The way they say it is that they are no longer suspending the damage element, and they left it at that. With respect to the associations, it kind of puts the association's emergency powers in a position now of, do we have them or don't we? With respect to the association's emergency powers, many of the powers that have been granted in the Florida statutes are still available to the association through other means and methods. For instance, if you have not at this point put into place restrictions with respect to requiring anyone who's in your common elements to wear a mask, you have the ability to do so just via the normal standards of an association in maintaining the health, safety, and welfare of your common elements. So ultimately, what we're telling our associations is don't focus or hyper-focus on the Department of Business and Professional Regulations suspension and removal of the suspension of the wording of the statute. Focus on the powers that you have, and we do still believe that the emergency powers are available to the association, and should they need to use them or invoke them. We're also suggesting that associations speak with legal counsel, because at this point, with respect to running meetings, going ahead and doing those types of, if they need to have any type of communication going out to residents, you should at least have the flow or understand how you can do that through telecommunication, webinars, or Zoom meetings such as that.
Okay, excellent. Now, I do have here one question from one of the listeners. Is there a difference in the emergency powers between the pandemic and the emergency powers that were traditionally designed for hurricane disaster recovery?
So that's a great question. What initially happened was the statute, the Florida statute, and the association's emergency powers that are contained therein were specifically drafted for the after effects of a hurricane. They were never intended, or as the drafters have commented, they were not intended to apply to a pandemic, because it just wasn't something that when they were drafting the statutes, they could have foreseen or thought that would have occurred. We're going to try, and by we, there's a collective group of condominium association lawyers who are going to, within the future, try and reanalyze that association emergency power statute and broaden the wording to make sure that it encompasses and covers all sorts of casualties, issues, concerns, emergencies that we may face through condominium associations and HOAs.
Okay, excellent. So we did have some questions here from some of the listeners. They're asking, where can they obtain the county order? So you can obtain your county order basically from your county's website directly, as well as from your city's website. You could just Google your city and put COVID-19, and that information will quickly pop up for you. You can also send an email to either of us, and we'll be glad to send you to those websites that you may need. So let's go into the reopening of the pools. I know that's something that a lot of board members are excited and also nervous at the same time that order was finally open and lifted. Could you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing from your clients, Yvonne? And I'll give a little bit of a management perspective right after what we're doing with regards to opening of pools. Can you give us your opinion on that and what approach you believe your clients should be taking?
Sure. So the first and most important thing is to make sure that you're sitting within the guidelines of your local county and city. If you are making sure that the way that you're operating your pool is sitting within those guidelines, then if you are going to be operating and you have certain restrictions in place, you may want to consider putting into place a set of rules to address what those restrictions will be. Understand that these rules that we're putting into place now on this basis of addressing the coronavirus are fluid. So you can change them. You can make amendments to them. You can get rid of them if you need to, all done via a board meeting. Most likely a board meeting, 48-hour notice. So when we're talking about pools specifically, what we are seeing is that our associations are opening them up. They're opening them up cautiously. They're doing it with rules and regulations that have been approved by their board. They're also taking the heed from the emergency orders of the county and the city and ensuring that what they are doing falls in line with the local jurisdiction.
Okay. Yeah, I know from our side, we have found in most of our associations that we serve, it's been a bit challenging to be able to open the pools just because of the fact of trying to meet the demands of the order. Most associations, actually all associations are nonprofit. So most of them are running very lean because of cost, right? So we haven't been able to put either the personnel or have the individuals in place to be able to meet the particular orders. So what we're trying to do is just tell our board members to be a bit patient and be a bit understanding, and also communicating more importantly to the residents and letting them know what is going on and why these decisions are being made. It's not decisions that are being made just to be difficult. It's more just being very difficult for the board themselves to be able to manage. By communicating to the residents, we found that people are becoming a little bit more understanding. I mean, board members are volunteers, right? They're not getting paid for this. They're also dealing with their own issues with COVID and so forth, and their families and whatnot, whatever preparations they're doing on top of what they're dealing with their associations. So more than anything is really being patient and understanding and compassionate and just communicating with your residents. And we've noticed thus far that has worked. And I would say out of our 50 communities, we really only have one pool that has technically opened. And that's just because they have the personnel in place, and we've basically we replaced the individuals that were doing cleaning really to be managing part of that. So that's that. And when it comes to, let's say with regards to helpful tips, are there any helpful tips that you believe that you've provided to your clients, Yvonne, that we can share with our listeners?
So it's important to respect that there are still going to be residents and people within the community who are concerned with the virus, who consider themselves to be high risk and want to protect themselves, which is, a definite important goal for our residents. And so when we're discussing associations, we want our association board members and the communities to understand that this is a time where we have to kind of work our way through these things. We have to be understanding of other people's concerns in the fact that they are valid, and especially with respect to their health and safety and the concerns of their welfare. We're seeing a lot of kind of new issues and problems come up. How do you deal with this unit owner if they're not wanting to wear a mask? What do we do if they're not being compliant in the elevator? A lot of it, as you said, Rafael, is really about patience and being able to kind of communicate well with the with your owners. So I think with respect to tips, you want to make sure that we have, if necessary, and you're acquiring it, supplies available to make sure that you are keeping sanitary, the common elements sanitary, that you have additional supplies if necessary. If you're requiring masks to be worn, that you have signs doing that, direction. You also want to make sure that as a board, you are communicating to your residents and that you are being patient, which is really probably the most important out of all of that.
No, most definitely. I mean, one thing that must be kept in mind as well is, we get the question a lot, well, do we have even the right to close the pool if the county has opened, has lifted the order for us to open the pools? And I take the position, correct me if I'm wrong, Yvonne, I take the position that I think it'll be easier to show a judge that you didn't have the abilities to be able to follow those orders, and then having to just open the pool and not being able to manage that situation, right? I mean, we have associations that, they want to come up with creative rules, which I get it. Hey, we're not going to allow anyone that doesn't live within the association to come in and use that pool. However, how are you going to manage that situation? Who's going to be controlling that? Are you going to make volunteers or management, the police, to be able to manage that? So that's the approach that we've been taking, and most people have been listening to it, and we believe it's really the right thing at the end of the day, because what we're looking at and what we're dealing with is individuals' health, right? So, Misha, I want to direct this to you because I know that many associations have had construction projects going on, and you know, many had a tough decision of what to do. Could you give us a little bit of insight of what your firm has seen and how you've dealt with your clients when it came to these construction projects? Did they continue going? Give us a little bit of insight of what your opinion is on that.
We had actually both happening. The project that were already started, and particularly those that we needed kind of to shore up before hurricane season is in full swing, have been going on uninterrupted. What did change though is that the modality of how we come to the property and how we interact at the property has changed. The question that was asked of us immediately after the pandemic was pronounced is, what are you doing proactively in order to address that, and what is your staff going to do? And so what we have devised is essentially a book of rules that is formalized in a statement that we give to our clients, essentially saying all of the employees of M2E will wear personal protective equipment. We will wear masks whenever in any of the common areas. We'll come in individual vehicles, and we will leave in individual vehicles. We will eat in a separate area unless we tell us that there is an area we can eat. And that gave a level of comfort to the association that we were not adding any liability or additional threat, so to speak, to the community. That's for the communities that have their project ongoing. For the projects that were just about to start when all of this happened, they have typically been put on pause. We have now seen that somehow magically July 1st, in the mind of a lot of association, is the magic date for whatever reason. And we have heard from the majority of those that they will be rebooting the process. We have kind of a partnership relationship with the association that we work with. And because we cover the Tri-County area with our two offices in West Palm Beach and Miami, we actually have kind of a partnership agreement. If these things are in place in your association, then we will continue to perform the work. And they will likewise tell us, if your staff obeys by these rules, then you're welcome to continue to work. So it's a partnership relationship.
So I know before the call, we were chatting a little bit about the impact. So I know you mentioned earlier that you had, since so many people were at home, those construction projects that continued, you had people complaining and wanting you guys to stop. So I'm sure that was interesting, huh?
Well, patience, what Yvonne had responded, I think that all of the engineers in the field have become Zen masters, because how do you silence a chipping hammer? The density of occupancy obviously has now been much more elevated than it used to be before, but I think that we have, with the approach of partnering with the association and specifically with the management company in explaining that we are doing this so that by the time that a hurricane comes in, you will not be wet. That's a powerful argument to say, rather than let's stop and then you'll call us sometimes in September when you are knee deep in water. So if there is a meeting, if there is a proactive understanding of, we're sorry, we know that there is a whole lot more people in the building than there is usually. The chipping and the dust will continue. However, it will make it stop earlier than if we stop now and reboot post-hurricane season.
Of course. And now that we're in the talk of hurricane season, Misha, because you bring up a very excellent point, could you tell us a little bit about, from an engineering perspective, what you believe some of the preventative maintenance items that could be addressed prior to a storm?
Preventive maintenance is the one that nobody wants to do, because it is maintaining things that you don't see, right? It is why, if it ain't broken, let's not fix it.
Correct.
And I think that I wouldn't have a company if everybody was doing their preventive maintenance correctly. That being said, we always stress the importance of preventive maintenance, specifically as it relates to the elements of the building that are in direct line of threat if something happens facing in the hurricane season. We specifically talk about envelope. We're in Florida, so if you look east, there is the ocean. If you look west, there is the Everglades. If you look up, there is the sky, and today is a good illustration. And if you look down, there is underground water. We are literally surrounded by water, and it's an aggressive and salty water that is the worst possible threat to any building. So what is the importance of preventive maintenance? It pertains to those things that could help prevent more catastrophic problems later on during the unforeseen event that can occur, such as a hurricane or even a large storm. What are those? Well, you need to ask yourself, what are your warranties representations? And that's something that I punt back to Yvonne, because people say, my roof is fine, I have a 20 years roof. Did you read the fine print? The fine print says, yes, comma, if you maintain it properly and you have it recertified every year by somebody that we trust. Did you do that? No, not really. Wrong answer. My sliding glass doors are less than 10 years old. They shouldn't be leaking. Did you read the maintenance manual that was given by the sliding glass door manufacturer that says that you need to wipe the salt of it and the gasket should be in good skirt? No. So did you look at your maintenance plan that says that you should repaint your building and that your reserve says that you repaint it every 7 years rather than buying a new sofa for the lobby? Well, the sofa was much cuter. So all of these people who come to you after, and this is a Dan question more than a Misha, will look for excuses not to do what their warranty says they should actually do. And you are really giving them an opportunity to say, sorry, I would have loved to help you with your leaking roof, but you didn't inspect it for 11 years. And the fact that you had your mechanical maintenance people walk on nails and perforate it is not a problem of mine, so it's now your problem. I know that your sliding glass doors are failing, but your gaskets are dry because nobody even looked at them. And even when you repainted the building, you chose not to address the metal and sealant that should have been part of maintenance. Another thing is, and we see it now more and more because we had storm before the hurricane season, drainage is one of the very important issues, particularly if you live somewhere near the bay. You need to understand the essential, the elementary physics of water goes down if you give it a slope, but if it has nowhere to go, it will not go there. I know this is very advanced engineering, but essentially to say that you have wells that are half full with water because the tide is high means that you have half a well, not an entire well. And I don't care how deep your well is, if the tide is high, the water has nowhere to go. So what did you do? Are your sump pumps properly maintained? Do they have somewhere to pump the water? Because if the bay is at a higher level than the bottom of your parking, guess what? Gravity applies, and that's a law that even Yvonne cannot do anything about. So these are elements that one would want to have an engineer look at and say, I looked at your building, and here is the checklist of what you should do in order to face this hurricane the best possible prepared. So, hey, Mr. Engineer, this is my building, this is my log, what should I do? We go, we see, we do the checklist, and we help them essentially find the delta of the things they don't have in order to be properly maintained. And finally, there is one particular thing I want to point out. There is a certain expectation of building elements that will never be met. And this is kind of when the engineer gives the bad news, even because it's the truth, even if somebody doesn't like it. Your sliding glass doors are not waterproof. Let me repeat this one more time.
I was going to ask you to repeat that, please.
Let me repeat this one more time. You bought a condo, not a submarine. Your sliding glass doors are not waterproof. Even if they are brand new sliding glass doors, and we are involved in several of the claims that result from those, the water resistivity is 15% of what your wind resistivity is. So if your windows on a high rise can withstand 100 pounds per square foot of wind pressure, they can only withstand 15 pounds per square foot of water pressure. And in any reasonable South Florida storm, they will leak.
Of course.
So the question becomes, Once they leak, how do we control it? And are they at least able to perform to the 15%, which surprisingly, a lot of them are not. So you should hire an engineer or that would look at the testing that would basically say, yes, your sliding glass doors meet the notice of acceptance that they were designed and installed as, but you should still take the following preventive measures because in a serious storm, they might leak. It's a long-winded answer to a very very simple question.
No, I think it's a good amount. It's an excellent amount of information and knowledge that really I'm sure a lot of people are not considering. So Misha, my understanding then is that M2E will prepare, if an association is interested, and prepare a checklist on those points that maybe are overseen from a management side, because you guys are really the experts in that area. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and very often, again, the devil is in the details.
Correct.
Somebody would come to us and say, what do you mean I have a problem with my roof? Here is my 20 years, no dollars limit warranty. And we go, look at page 3, appendix 6C that says it needs to be recertified. And the funny part is that it's not that expensive to do, to find an approved roofer that would go inspect it and re-endorse the warranty. That's how it's called. Basically say, here I'm, spend $300 on this or $400 on that, and that makes your warranty in effect. That's the best $400 that you can spend.
Of course, of course. And Dan, let me throw this at you, because I know you guys deal with a lot of claims and whatnot. Let's say if an association did decide to do a report like what Misha had presented, and they still have a major loss, because water gets through wherever it needs to get through. Does that assist the association when it comes to a claim perspective?
Well, I think it can if it's properly curated. You need to make sure that when you're doing these things and you're engaging engineers or contractors, there's a couple things that Misha has said and words he used, which with experts from Global Pro as part of your team doing that investigation, we have to make sure that you want to avoid the pitfalls of your policy by saying words like leak and describing water, that got through a failed system. The fact of what Misha is describing is that your windows have certain tolerances, and when those tolerances are exceeded, they fail. And when they fail, water gets into the building and causes damage to the building. So therefore, we have a failed window system, not a leaking window. The word leak and several other words are utilized in policies to exclude coverage. And unfortunately, a lot of times those are the same words that a lot of us use to describe those damages. And it's not that Misha was ill-intended. He was well-intended, but the fact of the matter is that Misha is not an insurance expert. He is certainly an engineering expert, and we've used M2E many, many, many times. And I know many of our clients routinely use them as a leader in the industry. But the fact of the matter is their role is different than that of an insurance expert such as ourselves. And so you want to be careful because, like, for instance, the word leak in the context of an insurance policy can be construed to be something that's long-term and ongoing and therefore not covered. I think a lot of people in 2017 were shocked to learn that their insurance companies all of a sudden didn't think water in the building that got there because of Hurricane Irma was hurricane damage. Suddenly it was called something called wind-driven rain. It was a new term that no one ever had heard before, 2017. And now all of our claims are being denied, or underpaid, or delayed due to extraneous investigations into what led to the, quote, wind-driven rain. Wind-driven rain is nothing. What we had was a hurricane. And what we saw is that when insurance companies were tested on the issue of wind-driven rain, many of them, nearly all of them for our claims, came to us and paid. Because the reality of it is that it was not something like a flood versus a wind damages. Again, a lot of times some people see water all over their gym from a broken pipe and say, oh my God, we had a flood in the gym area and it caused all this damage. But the word flood in the context of an insurance policy is given a specific meaning. So using the word flood to describe the cause of the issue or the damage and in that regard you would receive a denial for coverage. The fact of the matter is you had a water loss because you're covered for water damage, and water is the covered peril or the covered cause of loss in it. So you got to be very careful when you're obtaining reports from engineers or from building consultants for the condition of your property. Now, I think it's an incredible, great practice. I definitely think I encourage people to do that. I think everything that Misha talked about is that we see a lot of it all the time. But you got to be very careful with those reports and making sure that the information that's contained within them does not in some way prejudice you in the future. Because as Misha noted, we do live in coastal areas, water's all around us, and it impacts the buildings on a routine basis. But how you discover that damage or what damage it caused in the context of insurance, whether it's case law or the policy or legislatively, may be interpreted to provide coverage, not exclude it. And only is it excluded if the opinions of experts can utilize words or terms of art that don't provide coverage. So we have a team of attorneys on staff here and the reason why I have attorneys is because this stuff is, these contracts, these policies are written by lawyers, right? And the legislation is lobbied for by lawyers. And so at the end of the day, a lot of the curators of a lot of these issues are lawyers. So we started hiring lawyers. And so those lawyers now investigate the latest case law, meaning the opinions of the courts and the holdings in those opinions, and how the courts are interpreting that language and how it's being used either to provide coverage or exclude it coverage. So when you're going through this preventative maintenance and you're obtaining these reports, and which is an absolute incredible practice, and I'm a huge proponent of it. We have our own preventative program, Preferred Client Services, and we tell people all the time, sign up early. And part of that is looking at the static condition of the property, and a lot of times engaging engineers to assist us with that because we aren't engineering experts, right? So and sometimes the mechanical systems and whatever else require the skill sets that a company like M2E has. In fact, we've worked very closely on a huge claim with M2E, arguably the single largest first-party property insurance claim paid in the state of Florida. And it had it not been for M2E's specialty expertise in an area, I don't believe we would have had the success that we did. So it's important that you align yourselves with the people that know what they're doing and take the time to understand how the words in which they're using to describe it is how it may prejudice you, not just today, but in the future. And as we head into storm season and we see flooding, actual flooding, and not a water pipe breakdown on an elevated deck, or we see water damage in areas that are next to an elevated deck, and we believe that's flood, which it's not. Making sure that you access your resources like us or MTV and do proper investigations in them, not only for the purpose of making a claim, but for what's to come. And because you don't know what's right around the corner.
Correct.
We all see 2020 has turned out to be a heck of a year. It just keeps coming at us. So we have another storm in the Gulf, Cristobal, headed to the shore. We're expecting it to majorly impact the state of Florida. Oddly enough, the major rain event is actually, they expect to happen in Florida, not in Texas. So something to keep your eye on and something to look not so much forward to, but something forward thinking. Practice preparedness is what I preach. And I encourage everyone that's tuning in now to make sure that you are practicing preparedness and asking the right questions. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, Dan, and I couldn't agree with you more. You said it, you nailed it on the head there when you mentioned about, getting meeting with your partners and dealing with the right vendors earlier on. We're a big proponent of having these agreements already signed. And that way you're aligned with what needs to get done. And, you have your team already in place. If you're going to do a report, an engineering report, I see a major value in doing that just because you're going to be able, at least from a management side for those managers, you're going to really be able to get attuned to the little details that you're going to miss. But more importantly, working with someone such as yourself, then, you already have the heads up of what we can and what we can't say. A lot of times we get put into the position of, and I get it, board members want to save money and so forth, but in the long haul, the loss of money that you could potentially lose You know, I'll give an example that we had from 2017 association. We strongly urged them to hire somebody to handle the claim. And as much as we pushed and pushed and pushed, even brought the attorney in to help us push, it didn't happen. The initial claim was about $100,000. Finally, I'm sorry, the claim, they were offered $100,000. Finally, they signed a public adjuster agreement about a year and a half later, and they ended up receiving close to $800,000.
Yep.
But it's not just about that difference of the 700,000. It's the time that was wasted and the frustration amongst the residents and the board, because they just can't, they can't comprehend that process. So by starting earlier on, you know, you're able to avoid a lot of these issues. The process is the process, right? I mean, no one can speed it up. But if you get your game face on earlier on and you're able to address these concerns immediately, then you avoid a lot of the frustrations that sometimes board members have during these large catastrophes.
Yeah, I think a lot of associations think that, you know, they count the money before it comes, and they think that they're actually, because they believe that a lot of times their brokers are actually going to help them with the situation. Correct. In fact, in the state of Florida, it's actually against the law for an actual insurance agent to adjust a claim on behalf of a policyholder. They can only actually, by law, adjust a claim for an insurance company. And then at the end of the day, let's think about who pays your insurance broker. It's actually the insurance company, and they're paying a percentage of whatever you pay to the insurance company. And that's also negotiable, which most brokers don't even mention. And I think what 2017 and also what we see in 2020 shows us is that is how brokers actually can't actually help you with your insurance claims. In 2017, most associations were caught off guard by this illusory coverage for, you know, wind and rain. And then in 2020, most of our business community was caught off guard with this idea that you're not even covered for a pandemic. That all goes back to the brokers. And so you've seen a rise in claims against brokers. But the reality of it is, the state of Florida, they're protected. Their fiduciary obligation most often only extends to the amount of premium you pay. Most of these claims, though, are significantly in excess of whatever you may have paid to that broker. So you don't even have a viable recovery, even if you could go after them for their mistakes, because you leaned on them and relied on them to make sure you had what you need in the event of a loss. And that's what differentiates what we do from what they do, and why we implore associations to consider it. The proofs in government studies that was done by the state of Florida after the 2005 storms, it proved that by hiring an insurance representative at the onset of a loss, you'll receive between 500 to 700% more than if you do it on your own.
Our numbers are again
between 500 to 700% more than if you do it on your own. And the reality of it is that in the first 4 months following Hurricane Irma, we recovered more than $200 million for property, for community associations alone that were impacted by Hurricane Irma. Most of our claims that received payments were receiving payments that were in the mid six figures to, and I would say anywhere between the mid six figures to the low seven figure range on advance payments. We had multiple claims that, without the need for litigation, settled in or around the $10 million range. And again, no litigation, all done under 8 months. Most people don't realize that based on Florida law and the policies, a typical insurance claim process should be 4 to 8 months. So a lot of the questions we get is, oh, how long is it going to take? And what is it going to cost? Well, if you retain someone such as ourselves, we do a straight contingency fee basis, and we will front if not all of the upfront expense associated with any of the investigation needed. And there's an investigation needed, especially as these policies get more and more stringent on what they will and won't pay for. And that's the thing, is you're paying more for less coverage. It's a fact. Okay. That's how it's trending, a hard market. So now you're paying even more for less coverage. So we want to make sure that you're maximizing the recovery. And the fact is your property managers are not claims experts, and relying on them to do it actually puts their fiduciary obligations on the line. And I have seen where property managers have gotten sued by making improper representations in regards to scope of damage, where it is, acting as if they were, they knew more than, whatever the other person is, or relied on their building engineer, not an actual licensed engineer, if there's a difference, to take photographs and report back. And what they reported back was, it looked like pictures he took for his Instagram or Facebook rather than what you actually need for a claim. they just don't have the sophistication and knowledge as it relates to the insurance process. And it's important to understand what your obligations are. And your obligations are to demonstrate your damages and make sure you're taking pictures in every corner of the room. Don't just take pictures of the close-up damage of the broken pipe. Take a picture of where that pipe is. Just for like if the window's failing, don't take a picture of the corner of the window where the water came through the separation in the frame. Take a picture of the whole window, then take a picture of a close-up. In fact, when you're doing these investigations with the companies, a reputable company like M2E, make sure that you collect their photographs and make sure that you have, video of the environment in which you're in. I always tell people after a major storm, walk out onto the street, take pictures of everything. Take pictures of the roadblocks, the trees down, the building next door that blew to the ground but yours is still standing. That's what that does is it shows the force of the storm, demonstrates the conditions at that location, helps with proving that your building could have sustained and that the forces were strong enough to cause the damage to your building. Because I can't tell you how many times the insurance companies after Hurricane Irma tried to say that there was actually not a hurricane in South Florida, 6-8 months after the storm, passed. You know why? Because there's about a 4-month cycle on psychology when it comes to any major disaster. And we're already seeing it here with the pandemic. As we head into the middle of June, guess what? We're not talking about pandemics anymore. We've moved on to the next disaster. So after that 4-month mark, it's really important that you have collected all those photographs and information, prepared yourself for it. But also right now, take the pictures, collect the information about your current environment. What does it look like? So we can show a contrast between what it looked like then and what it looks like now. Okay. So, and that can help you with facilitating the claims process. And just because your insurance company denies your claim doesn't mean it's over.
Correct.
Just this year alone, we collected over $20 million on claims that were said to have been denied usually because of some representation made by a property manager or a building consultant or something where they thought they were helping, but they just actually mishandled the claim. And then we had to go in, do a lot of research, represent the loss to the insurance company, and the insurance companies did the right thing, stepped up and actually made payments. So it's really important that, again, just to kind of reiterate a couple points I made, take pictures now. You hear it all the time. A few people do it, but don't get lazy with it. Actually go to every part of your building and take those photographs, document it. I absolutely implore you to talk to companies like M2E and Global Pro to, get out there early. It doesn't cost anything to contact us if you have questions about your insurance coverages if you're going through a renewal period, to look at them for you so you're not caught off guard. Understand the role of your broker. They're there to sell you a product. When you had an issue with your car, you didn't go back to the car salesman. You went to the mechanic, just like you would go to your engineer. Well, we're that insurance expert. We're like the mechanic. We have the tools. Certainly your salesman knows that you need to change the oil every 10,000 miles, whatever else. They don't have the tools to do it. If they even did it, they probably do it wrong. It probably take longer. All those things are so true when it comes to insurance, just like when it comes to construction. If you don't hire a representative like M2E or someone like that, or if you don't hire a competent counsel to represent you in litigation, it's probably not going to turn out so well. And it's probably going to take you a lot more time and money. And that's what we want to do, is save you that expense. So make sure you do those things. It's important. It's so important. And I feel like right now there's a lot of fear mongering over insurance rates. If you file the claim, your rates are going to go up. Newsflash, rates are not dictated by actual loss history. It's a consideration, but really where rates are impacted where rates are impacted is legislatively. That's why we hear about rate increases being authorized by the state. Everyone is seeing a rate increase right now, whether you had a claim or not. If you had 20 or if you had one, they're all getting rate increases. So don't tell me it's just because you had one claim. In fact, I can't find or see any justification as to why someone would cancel you if you get damaged by, let's say, neighboring construction projects. It's not like they're going to build another building next door. So it's a once and done. So once I get that money and I do the reconstruction, rebuild my property, what was no harm, no foul? Now I've restored my property, fortified my property, I got the latest building materials on there. How am I at more risk? Why is it more expensive to insure me? It doesn't equate. It doesn't add up. So this idea of not filing claims, things like that, and equating to rate increases. Now, that's not to say that you should be in the claims business filing claim after claim after claim after claim. That's to say that you should ask the right questions.
Correct.
But at calling your broker, a lot of them do have a fiduciary obligation to make notice of the claim. So just because you called the broker and you don't think that you, quote, made a claim, a lot of times it will appear in your loss run. So do be careful with that. And last thing I will add is that, things are changing. And as we change in our response, and to piggyback on what Yvonne said regarding PPE gear and making sure that you have a plan, be consistent. I'm seeing a lack of consistency between the plan and the execution.
Yep.
And especially as we get outside that 4-month cycle and we forget about COVID and pandemics, stay consistent. Okay, stay consistent. And PPE is no longer something separate. Okay, it is part of a claim. So if you require people to wear masks and protective gear, and it's a cost of mitigating and fixing and repairing, even for your engineer, and I'm sure it's a line item in there if it's an increased cost, it should be included in that claim just as it was, just as part of it, because that's where we are today. It's no different. It's not something separate. It shouldn't be excluded from coverage. It's not something virus related. No, that's what's required to come on our property. And here's the guidelines for doing it. And that's it. I can tell you, we already have several losses in here where the insurance company tried to separate the cost of mitigation and the requirement of PPE gear from the cleanup, the repairs for the water loss. That's a no-no.
Yeah.
It is our today. That is what it is. You owe me that cost.
No, and that's an excellent point, Daniel. And that's, that'll help me switch gears here, because one of the biggest concerns that we have as well is the whole evacuation process. Obviously when you're evacuating into one of these centers, most of the times they're designed and there's a ton of people inside of them. It's not, it's not an environment where people are feeling comfortable. Yvonne, I know you've already been in talks with several of the counties with regards to what they're going to be doing with regards to evacuation. What information have you heard that you could pass on to our listeners?
So it seems that most counties have to open up shelters for evacuation purposes. They are going to be requiring that the people that come into the shelters have protective gear, are wearing face masks, especially if we're still in the environment of the coronavirus, which I believe we will be through the hurricane season. And they also may be requiring you to bring sanitary items, meaning like your Clorox wipes and those types of things, if you are intending to move into shelters. I think that that's going to put a little bit of a restriction on people, meaning that they're not going to use or view shelters as this easy, let me go there when I need to evacuate type of area. Additionally, the shelters will have to expand. We noticed that with Irma. We saw how they opened them in Dorian when we just had a threat that it is sometimes done on a small basis, that only certain shelters are open, that they reach capacity very quickly, and then they have to move on to others. I would anticipate that they would have additional and more areas of shelters open, which would impact, you're getting ready for a storm. Number one, getting these shelters ready takes a lot of time. And then also, once people are in shelters, how getting them back home also takes time as well. So that kind of adds to the amount of time that you would intend or plan to be away from your home if you're evacuating. But my main concern is not so much about the shelters. We leave that to the counties and the governments and, following what they're requiring. But what happens when our residents decide not to evacuate? Right. When they decide to stay in their home, when they're now having to address both the coronavirus and a possible threat of a hurricane. How does that change? What's the dynamic going to be for your association? And the tip and the way they would address it is through prior planning. Dan hit upon it. You have to make sure that you've got your things in place. If you are expecting your residents to stay within the building and you are in an evacuation zone, you must know who's there. You got to know their contact information. At the best, keep a list ready and accessible so that if something would happen and there needs to be emergency access to the building, there's a list there for first responders to tell them who's in that building. It's important. We have been very lucky in South Florida over the past couple of years. We've seen the storms come through, graze us like Dorian, sit and have devastation for the Bahamas, but we haven't been significantly impacted to that extent. But that luck eventually runs out. And so the important thing is prepare and put a plan in place and understand that you may have more residents because of the virus who decide not to travel, not to get on a plane to leave the state, or their location, and to stay kind of hunkered into their unit, which is again going to pose some additional problems.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point, Yvonne. I mean, as Dan said and yourself, I mean, right now, I believe if there's any year that you need to make sure you don't waste any time with regards to the execution of your plan, it's this year. I mean, we're taking the mindset now that normally we would just try to ramp up about 7 to 10 days before. In this case, we're probably going to want to ramp up much earlier, just because we don't know what the impact is going to be. We don't know who's going to leave, who's not going to leave. And then it becomes a big responsibility of who's to bear these individuals, especially the coastal buildings, that most of the times they are evacuated. And most of the times you do have to shut down the elevators. You do have to shut down a significant amount of equipment. And the residents may not understand that. So we're trying to take the approach, this year, even though we've always communicated, is to extra over communicate this year, just because we believe the same thing. We believe that a lot of the residents are going to just say, well, you know what, I stayed home during COVID, I'm going to stay home during a hurricane. But these are two totally different things.
Yeah.
Excellent. And with regards to any particular plans or any particular tips that you want to provide with regards to the difference of a regular hurricane and this pandemic, is there anything else that you wanted to add, Yvonne?
So I think the biggest takeaway with respect to is the coronavirus and how it's going to work into the hurricane season is knowing the residents that are going to be staying and making sure that communication gets out from a property management perspective, from an association, condo perspective. Communication, we talked about that with the coronavirus. That's going to have to be key with respect to hurricane preparation, because you've got your pools now, let's say, open at a certain capacity. You would have to then start taking actions to move furniture in, taking down the normal hurricane kind of just dismantling of items. Your other common elements, recreational facilities may not be open. You're going back to a restrictive kind of a situation. Add to that, like you said, Raphael, the elevators and all of that. Prior planning, starting now, is important. We all have prior planning, but just add from a personal perspective with respect to going out and going shopping in where we are in over the course of the last couple of months. It's been difficult. Shopping with masks on and gloves is difficult for all of us individually. Add to that now having to do hurricane shopping preparedness, because that's what we do in South Florida. Everyone waits till like the last minute to go get their supplies, and bringing them in. That's all adds stress and strain on an already stressful time. So the suggestion is just make sure that you have a prior plan in place. Focus specifically on residents. If they are going to stay, make sure that there's lines of communication between management and those residents. And the biggest takeaway is have a list. Know who's been in your building.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, in respect to everyone's time, we're getting real close to the 12 o'clock hour. If there's any final tips that any of you wanted to provide, maybe I'll start off with you, Misha, if there's any closing statements or any tips you want to provide to our listeners.
Well, an ounce of preventive maintenance is worth a ton of repairs after the hurricane.
Well said.
That's really the simplest way for me to express it.
Well said. Excellent. Thank you, Misha. And Dan, any last closing statements?
I think involve your experts and your professionals as board members in your discussions and your planning. We have several associations that only seek the advice of counsel because they're worried about liability issues, but exclude engineers, insurance experts, or brokers from those conversations. And in the instances where we've had that opportunity to sit down with those boards and meet with them directly, we were able to discover all kinds of new and interesting things that they had not even considered, and build a more appropriate plan in dealing with, especially our new normal, and dealing with the pandemics and some of the things that Yvonne touched on. So do it early, do it often, and make sure that you stay in your lane. I find that a lot A lot of people get outside their lane, start making decisions on their own as board members without the consent of everyone. That's not your role. Your role is to be a purveyor of information, facts, and to protect the fiduciary interest of everyone. So collect as a collective group, as a board, not as an individual. So we're here as a resource. We want to be helpful. We're available 24/7, 365. We haven't stopped working despite COVID and all the shutdowns. We were deemed to be essential because we're regulated by DFS. So like with Misha, an engineer, if you had ongoing projects, we never stopped. So it's been an interesting time. So again, we're here, very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you, Raphael. Thank you to the other panelists for being a part of this. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And Yvonne, any last tip?
Well, thank you again for having me. I want to leave you with my 6 Ps. Prior, proper planning prevents potential problems. I think that's very important. I know that in the medical field, they use the 6 Ps as well. So I think they sometimes have a 7th P that they add on there. But ultimately it is prior planning. It is using the resources that you have available to you. As this panelist has, or these panelists have discussed today, it is just making sure that you are prepared.
Excellent. Thank you, Yvonne. And what I would like to close off with is, as Dan said earlier, the plan is only as good as its execution. So one thing that I strongly urge you, especially in this time, in this whole pandemic situation that we're dealing with and hurricane season, everything combining all at once, is try to run a simulation, is give yourself some time to run a simulation of how the plan is going to be executed, who's going to be involved in that plan, and to make sure that those volunteers are committed, should you have volunteers, or the team is committed to making that happen. The only way you can know if it's going to happen is by practicing it out and getting a feel for what's going to be done. And then also finally is communicating with your residents. And this year more than ever is having that over communication of letting them know what you're going to do so that they are aware, so that if you do need to evacuate, they understand the conditions that the building will be left and the conditions that they will be in if the building needed to be evacuated. And more than anything, I do want to thank each and every one of you. If it wasn't for each of you, we wouldn't be able to do this. I want to thank you, Misha, with M2E for being part of this. Dan, I want to thank you. It's always a pleasure working alongside you at Global Pro. And Yvonne, same here. Thank you so much. And your firm, Siegfried. I also want to thank the ladies behind the scenes, Stephanie and Ashley, that helped put this together. Without them, I think all 4 of us would be lost in one way or another. And more importantly, I wanted to thank the managers and board members for always really taking the time to gain the additional knowledge to make you a stronger leader in our industry. Thank you all for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.